Dawson's Rambles.
Hey YouTube, Dawson Writer here. Welcome to my video where I'm ranking every version of Rita Repulsa from the Power Rangers series. This is part of a series of videos that I'm starting to do across the year in honor of the anniversary and probably beyond, ranking different versions of characters. I've already started it with Tommy, and I thought since we just got a new version of Rita, technically we've gotten a couple this year in a manner of speaking, I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to do ranking of Rita. Now this is pretty much every main version of Rita that I could think of / find. There might be some that I'm forgetting, like something from a video game or maybe the Paper Cuts comics, but I never read the Paper Cuts comics and I haven't played all the video games, and obviously I can only rank the ones that I remember and have an impression of. But I think we all know who the real best Rita is. Let's go ahead and get started. So at the bottom of the list is the 1995 movie Rita. Now unfortunately in most of these lists where a movie version of the character exists, they're going to be at the bottom. As mentioned in the Tommy video, not because there's anything wrong with the character, but because they're basically the same character from the show with a different design. That doesn't mean they're bad, it just means there's nothing interesting to compare and contrast about them. And I think this Rita, not only there was nothing interesting or different about her, but she had like the least interesting design change. Like at least all the Rangers had cool different costumes, and Zed's costumes I think are equally cool, but at least his was more significantly different. Like hers honestly just looked mostly the same to me. After that is Season 2/3 Rita. I should have mentioned that I count a different version of a character based off of when I feel there's a significant change. And obviously there was a change from us using dubbed footage in Season 1 to Season 2 and 3. We got a like actual in-person actress, we leaned more towards the comedy. I had a hard time deciding whether I liked Season 1 or Season 2 and 3 Rita better, because if I'm being honest, I'm not an overall big Rita fan, or at least I wasn't when I was younger in regards to the main show character. I'm still not. She was fine, if anything just annoying sometimes. But I spent more time, obviously, we all spent more time with Season 2/3 Rita, and she got a little bit more to do. You know, there was admittedly some fun and funny moments with her and Zed, so I was trying to decide which one I liked better or worse. And at the end of the day, I just found that, you know, this is kind of the main reason I didn't like Rita all that much, is she was just okay to annoying. And I think that's what Season 2 and 3's version of the character represents to me. And speaking of, just above it is Season 1 Rita. Again, I struggled which one I liked better or worse, because it's like, well, at least with Season 2 and 3 Rita, you don't have the awkward dubbing and all that stuff. But I decided to give the higher slot to Season 1 Rita simply because by nature of the footage, she was a little bit more menacing in that. There was actual moments where she felt like more of a threat, where there was an actual spooky, almost creepy vibe to everything, by nature of the Jew Ranger footage, especially during the Green with Evil arc and stuff like that. So I'm like, yeah, I think I like that a little bit better. A little bit more of a cool, menacing villain and compared to just mostly comedy. And then this one right here is a bit of a weird one, and there's not a whole lot of huge character to talk about, but is the Turtles comic version of Rita, which is primarily just a variant of comic Rita, meaning Rita Repulsa, but just actually a character. And there's not really any significant differences to her character. You know, her plots and character motivations all are pretty much in line with what you'd expect, but I ranked her a little bit higher for superficial reasons, is that she has a really awesome look in the sequel comic, and I just, in general, like the comic versions better, and I wanted to include her on this list, and I think she has a badass suit in this, and, you know, overall, I think is a better villain and character than the previous 3 on this list. Then you have the World of the Coinless Rita. Now, this Rita, at the start of her story, isn't really different than the main comic Rita. She has the same general character and backstory and everything, so it's basically the same character. But what sets her apart is what happens to her later on during the Coinless arcs, where I think it's Trini, if I remember, because I was trying to remember who did it, and I looked it up, and I think it's Trini, but Trini, like, reawakens her, and she becomes this, like, spirit, and then she awakens this zombie army. It's not, like, a huge, like, character arc or anything like that, but it's pretty cool. I like that idea, especially since this version of Rita was betrayed by Lord Draken, Evil Tommy, and, like, that's a huge change to the plot itself. But the idea that then she would later go on to become this really cool-looking, creepy Spectre Rita that, you know, reignites this zombie army. It's just a really cool idea and makes it a cool variant of the character. After that is the most recent one, Robo Rita. I tried to decide whether I liked Robo Rita or Zombie Rita better, because I think Zombie Rita is a really cool, like, horror vibes, which I really like. But I wound up liking Robo Rita a lot more than I thought I was going to. The design is simple, but I actually really like it. It's grown on me more and more, and the concept of her origin is really cool. The idea of Rita's pure evil spirit that was burned off in the Z-Wave possessing an Alpha 8 and becoming this Rita bot is just cool. Of the 3 core MMPR villains that has returned, this is by far the coolest explanation that leaves the least amount of questions. Not to mention, this is the most menacing version of on-screen Rita in my opinion. Like I mentioned, Rita kind of became more of a joke on top of her kind of grating voice, but this one, the performance of Barbara Goodson was actually menacing. Not to mention they were allowed to be a little bit more menacing because the tone was skewing a little bit older. Although I find it funny that what they consider to be like an older skewing tone is actually the tone of a lot of kids shows that are just for kids. But anyway, yeah, it was the most I actually felt Rita's threat and villainy on screen. Now next up is clone Dark Ranger Rita from the comics. Now this was a Rita that was created as a clone, I believe it was a putty clone, for the Dark Ranger arc in the comics, where we got a new version of the Dark Rangers that was basically Rita and her cronies as Dark Ranger, which was really cool. And just first of all, superficially, Dark Ranger Rita has an awesome, badass design. I just love the idea of that in concept. But they didn't have to, but they made her a character. This very easily could have just been a placeholder to do the Dark Rangers, whatever, but they made her kind of this self-aware clone type storyline where she has a lot of the personality and traits of Rita. She even has an interesting interaction with Tommy because of their shared history. But then she becomes her kind of own character, and that was actually kind of psychologically fascinating. And she even had a little mini arc in a one-off in like one of the special stories you get in the compendiums about her actually going on a bit of a redemption arc, which you might think is generic, but currently Comic Rita is definitely not on a redemption arc, so it's something different. But she wound up being a really compelling character for something that easily could have just been there solely to have Red Ranger Rita, which even then would have been kind of cool. Now the runner-up for me is 2017 movie Rita. This was another one where I struggled whether my number 2 is this one or Clone Rita, just because Clone Rita is more compelling of a character because she gets more to do character-wise. But I recently rewatched that 2017 movie again, and man, do I love this version of the character. We don't get an immense amount of depth on the character. I like to imagine that if we did a sequel, we would have found out why she betrayed the team and more on that, but Elizabeth Banks did such a great job here making Rita her own. You had a little bit of that camp, but you also had an actual villainous threat. Like, my favorite on-screen Rita by far, and I forgot how creepy she could be, and there was like some legit horror movie vibes when she went into the jewelry shop and she had all those people's gold teeth that she killed. It was actually disturbing and creepy, and like the imagery of her being like awakened as a corpse in the like the fishery or whatever you call it. That's not right. Or by the fishermen reminded me of I Know What You Did Last Summer when they found Helen's body. That's neither here nor there, but it is here because I'm comparing it. But yeah, I liked all that. Plus, I absolutely love the backstory of this version of Rita being the original Green Ranger. I love to see reboot stories like that where they kind of take elements you know and twist them in a new interpretation. And her being the original Green Ranger and Zordon being original Red was so cool. Not to mention I loved her suit as Green Ranger, but also I loved that her main suit in the movie was like a twisted, not all the way morphed version of that. So yeah, I'm so disappointed we're not going to get to know more about that mythology because I really like what they did with it. But number 1 for me is Comic Rita. As I mentioned, I've never been the biggest Rita fan. As a kid, I always liked Rita fine, if not finding her annoying. Definitely by far preferred Zed. But in the comics, much like with the characters of Jason, Zack, and Trini, they took a character that I wasn't really a fan of and made it a favorite. Rita probably in the comics is one of my favorite villains in the series overall. She arguably sometimes gets too much focus, like there's so many backstory issues, and she's gotten a lot of one-offs and like unlimiteds. It's like, dude, I love getting this fleshed out, but let someone else have the spotlight. But with that being said, because of that, we've gotten to know so much about her character, literally practically since birth until now, and she has such an interesting and compelling backstory where you find out she really wasn't like born into like this weird evil thing. Neither of her parents started out as evil, and she was kind of actually arguably born in a situation where she would have been set up to be good, but then got twisted by all these various circumstances, and is such a compelling character with these pushes and pulls of motivations and things that happen to her that are fascinating. Not to mention currently she's really awesome and badass as Mistress Vile, which is just such a cool idea. You know, I highly recommend checking out the comics for this. Again, I was never a Rita fan, but this made her such a cool villain and by far the best version of the character. But that is it for my list. Let me know what your favorite versions of the Rita Repulsa character are in the comments. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you get notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.